Good morning, everyone. This will be the briefest reflection of all, I hope. Uh, Look, I wanted to talk very briefly about a few things, not about readings. I'm not going to talk about the readings today. Um, I just have a few, I'm not sure should call them administrative notes. Let's just call them notes for lack of a better term. First of all, I had an interesting conversation with you yesterday, so I appreciated it. I want to thank you for it. And we will continue that conversation in the appropriate setting. So I think it's an important conversation. So let's continue having it in all good faith. Now, I checked Brightspace under assignments, and I have the assignments. I'm very excited, but I'm also terrified because I have to grade them, correct them, edit them, what have you, in Brightspace. And I'm not altogether comfortable there, but I'll figure it out. And I hope to have the papers back to you by Thursday, Friday of next week. It'll take me a little time. As I said, I'm new to it. I suspect the first 2 or 3 papers will take me hours. And then this, as I get accustomed to the system and to the approach, I'll start moving faster, I would hope. I wanted to say too that in Brightspace, you can correct a text, and you can also record, and you can make a recording. So I might do a bit of both. Now, I will focus more on content, on how you've, on what you say and whether it makes sense and whether you in some way substantiate it. I will pay attention to the presentation of the content too. Now, I do not want to play the role of editor. It's not my business to edit your work, but I will, where I feel justified, I might say something like this to you. The way you've presented it, it's not very clear, right? We often want to distinguish content from presentation, and the distinction makes sense. However, in practice, it's impossible to separate the two, right? And your job, I think you would agree, and if you disagree, let me know. But your job is not only to create an idea for yourself in content of some kind, but to present it in the right way, right? So I don't know that this point can be argued. It's just part of the academic game, right? I hesitate to call it a game. It's not the right word. The academic enterprise. You know, we're expected to use APA style and write in complete sentences. And if we know how to paragraph, so much the better. Now, you're all adults and you're all mature students. Now, I think you understand this, and I suspect there will be few problems of this kind. I don't expect perfection by any means. If you're struggling with ideas, perfection is not something you should be aiming at anyway, right? Whatever perfection is. Clarity would be enough. So that's more or less what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a clear presentation. I'm looking for evidence that you've thought about the text, that you've wrestled with it a bit, that you've engaged it, you've reflected on the readings, and you somehow incorporate it into your own experience. That is to say, you draw some connection to your own experience. So it's just not just a theoretical presentation, right? So I think I've explained that in some detail before. So when I go through the papers, I'll do another one of these reflections on the papers and give you my impressions of how you've done. So I'm very excited about looking at them. I'm apprehensive about working in Brightspace, but you know me, I've had that apprehension for some time. About Reading Week, here's a note about Reading Week. Sarah Wiebe, Professor Wiebe, I should say, has invited a guest speaker to speak, I believe, to Indigenous leadership in the week that you're here. So that will have to be coordinated somewhat, and it has yet to be coordinated, but the speaker has agreed to speak. So we're going down that road. And as soon as I have better detail there, I will communicate it. Third point, we're about to go in, we're going to switch gears. We're about to go into governance. And governance is one of the most frustrating topics of all, in my opinion. There's all sorts of theoretical literature, consulting literature, professional literature on governance. So everyone has something to say about governance. In reality, governance is a very complex idea, and it has a history, and I want to go through that a bit. We have readings on governance. I moved the polycentric chapter, which I think is chapter 9, chapter 8 of Principles. I moved it into next week so that we can continue reading that text and finish it. By the way, I know I just threw that at you at the last moment, but that text is not difficult to read. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not a confusing text, right? What it means is you can read it in, well, I found when I read through those chapters, and I read them 2 or 3 times, it took me about a half hour to get through a chapter in a reading. So I hope that doesn't complicate your life, but we need to go to governance. That doesn't mean that we're leaving leadership behind. Leadership, of course, will come back in the form of Indigenous leadership. And when we get to the topic of transformation, it will come back yet again. The ultimate connection that we're trying to make is between leadership and transformation. So that's where I'm trying to go, and trying to take all of us down that road. So we start with some theories of leadership. We look at governance. Governance is often what leadership becomes in the real world. That's why when I looked at the original course design, I thought, well, governance isn't quite on par with leadership or transformation. Governance is, one could say, a narrower issue. The problem is governance is everywhere, right? And as I just mentioned, it often, whether people admit it or not, or whether they're even aware of it, often governance becomes leadership. And that has, or brings with it, I should say, numerous difficulties. So there is a move, you can see it nowadays, to define new approaches to governance. Why? Well, the older approaches, meaning the ones we've used in the last 30 years, have tended to drag things down. Maybe I can put it that way. In other words, governance, we'll talk about it next week, but governance is about decision-making. And we'll see that. So there are different approaches to governance in the same sense that there are different approaches to decision-making. But governance is more than that. It acquires all of these layers in organizations, whether they're community organizations or public organizations, or for that matter, private organizations. Everyone has governance of some kind. Now, we need to pull that apart. I think, if you want my opinion, I think governance is one of the most difficult issues facing modern organizations in whatever field. There was in the 2000s, there was a crisis in the American economy, gave rise to a piece of legislation called Sarbanes-Oxley, which was all about governance. Why? because you had a slew of private corporations, Enron being the most, and if you have an opportunity, read about Enron. It's fascinating. It was a criminal organization disguised as a private company. And what was discovered when authorities looked at the Enron scandal is that Ken Lay, who was the executive, who had a board, a governance board he was supposed to be reporting to, there was almost no relationship between the executive, the organization, the board. The board was there to rubber stamp. Boards often are there to rubber stamp. That's one problem with governance. And Ken Lay, in essence, used the company to commit crimes of a whole variety of kinds. They became public. There was a huge hullabaloo. And everyone said, oh, governance is the most important thing of all. So organizations started focusing. The conversation turned to governance. And it still, in my view, largely focused on governance. And this is what I want to say to you, and we'll talk about it. Governance is one thing, leadership is another. They are not the same. So if you put a bunch of people with big pants on in a room and they have high rank and status, do you have leadership there? Even if they're making decisions, do you have leadership there? It's not at all clear you have anything like leadership there. So that's what we need to talk about. What do you do with governance? And I don't mean to dismiss governance by any means. Governance is a critical issue. That's why we're going to go through it. But its relationship to leadership needs to be clarified. And in our world now, I'll speak to my own experience. I would say the vast majority of the governance that I've seen in the public service of Canada is not well designed. If it's meant to support decision making, it's often, I don't want to say the opposite, but it's a barrier. It becomes a barrier. So something that's supposed to facilitate decision-making frustrates decision-making, right? And that's not uncommon. That's very common. So there is a relationship between leadership and governance, but we have to sort out what it is. And we have to be very careful not to replace one with the other. So that's governance. That's our next topic. By the way, I think I mentioned this. We keep leadership in our minds throughout this course. We'll be going to leadership, to Indigenous leadership, for the residency week. So I just got the text. They just came in the mail. This is Living Indigenous Leadership. We have some readings out of this, so that I would alert you to. Other than that, I have nothing to say. And you know what? I'm going to take the day off. I'm not going to grade anything. It's 10:30, 11:30. I'm going to go outside and run around and do things like that. So I'll be talking to you next week. So that's enough for now. I just thought I would touch base. Okay. I hope all is well. Any questions, comments? Just let me know. Thank you. Bye. Have a good weekend. Bye.